Yeah, start with the second half first. I don't think that the Crafts or anybody in New England should have been surprised by the notion that minority candidates or individuals who feel a candidacy is completely sealed off or a position is completely sealed off don't want to go. I mean, that's what the entire Brian Flores lawsuit is all about. Stop the dog and pony show. And guys are now starting to say, look, it's not entertaining to sit there and be led to believe you have an opportunity to be hired when you don't. So I think that the Patriots' decision, and Robert Kraft in his statement on Saturday announcing that Eliot Wolf was going to be the personnel head, said, as we discussed many times, it doesn't matter how many times you discussed it. It was discussed, with me personally, with others on the beat. And every time I said, but why? Why would you do that? If you need to have a GM who can run the draft or a final say person to run the draft and run your free agency, and you're not going to pull the rug out from under that person afterwards, well, why bother? Name him. Mm-hmm. Because that's in essence what they did. They knew what they were going to do. They didn't do it. And then later they did it. Now, as you've seen Mike Florio, Taylor talk about, the Patriots wanted to have their cake and eat it too. And they certainly did achieve that. But I also think it sends off smoke signals of this is a way to skirt the Rooney Rule.
And at the same time, I'm so curious because the Rooney Rule still has to be complied to. Now, my read on the situation was that they didn't want to do it before the draft because it would have created distractions where you have a group that has put in all the work, where you kind of have an idea of who these guys are, what the staff is. Obviously, you still had the transition of the system, but do you think there was a benefit to waiting because you didn't have to go through the whole bringing candidates in during a process where it might have been like, okay, now who's in charge? Is Eliot Wolf really the guy who's at the head of this thing? Or do you think regardless, they should have done it as early as possible?
I think they should have done it as early as possible. I don't think that this is going to be reflected in wins and losses on the field or practices in May, June, training camp, or in the season. I just don't think it will. It doesn't speak to an air of, hey, we know exactly what we're doing and this is how we're going to operate after we move on from Bill. And if that was the plan hatched, which is we're not going to – go ahead.
I was just curious because I feel like it still starts with the league, though, that the rule has to be adhered to, despite the fact that I know that we like to pretend that nepotism and, certain lineages don't exist. That is the way things are. If you have someone in your building like a Gerard Mayo, who Robert Kraft has known since he was in his early 20s as a player and has watched him grow, it makes sense that he's like, this is someone I know intimately. I've seen successful coaches. I'm going to elevate this guy. And with Eliot Wolf, we knew even when he was the de facto GM that he was well respected around the league and people thought that he could potentially be a general manager candidate. So do you think there's still a way that you can go about the rule in a way that's helpful, where you let the candidates know, like Adrian Clem last year, you're not really interviewing for this job, but we have to comply. So we'd like to see if you'd be interested in this job. Like one of the candidates was a salary cap expert. Do you think that's kind of the best way to go about it? Or do you think still, regardless of how comfortable you feel with your own people, you should be going through a thorough process to see other options?
Testing my skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps. Use the code CLNS for the first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
So to me, you're looking at the same situation over and over again of pretending one thing, executing another, and that doesn't achieve the final goal of trying to find a more diverse pool. I think the most important thing to remember is so frequently I think the NFL pool of candidates comes from a group of individuals who by the time they're 17 and 18 have already gotten themselves on a coaching track. You're much younger than I am, but I find people coming to me when they're freshmen in college, high school seniors. How do I get into the media? And that's the way it is with coaching or GMing or cap analysis or analytics. People start really, really young. And I think unless you have designs on that kind of a role or a track, because you definitely know you're not going to play in the league, those guys are getting a jump on you. That to me is one of the most interesting aspects of this. Like, how does Eliot Wolf get a jump on, despite his last name? How does he get a jump on any other number of candidates? John Lynch, white guy, eventually gets a job. He was in the league, though, and he has to make up for all the time that Eliot Wolf has spent in meetings and draft meetings and personnel meetings. So it's not as much about getting people in front of ownership. I think it's about more, Taylor, finding people like yourself, who are not in media, but who are so analytically and technically and schematically grounded, people of color, and cultivating those individuals so that they're in the pipeline earlier, which I think is somewhat being achieved to a degree. It's the head coach.
Like you have the coaching fellowships, and there are some efforts you have to give the league credit being made to at least get people of color in the pipeline, like you said, so that they're known, so that they can establish a presence and then go from there. And this is a super loaded question. I'm going to kind of wrap this up. It's just an interesting topic.
Yeah.
And if you don't have anything, I'm not going to hold it against you. This is a really difficult question. But are there any amendments to the Rooney Rule that you can think of as someone who's been in the space for so long, seeing how it was before it was implemented, how it's been after? Are there certain tangible changes that you think the league could make to make it more of a rule that is above board and isn't condescending to the people that have to go through it?
That's the biggest part to me, the condescension of it. I would blow it up, to be honest. I would eliminate it and come up with something entirely different. It's been bastardized to such a degree that it doesn't achieve what its goal is. And what it unfortunately does is gives a perception of, well, this person has achieved because of color. This person has achieved because they were fast-tracked. This person, I don't get my opportunity because I'm not a Rooney Rule candidate, but I'm more accomplished than this individual. I just think that, it's a long conversation. I'll just say this because I'm not going to delve into it, but it's that whole conversation of equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. And it's hard to force equality of outcomes. And we're realizing that around the world, really, in terms of that schism between what's the difference between the two. Quality of opportunity, are enough young Black people being afforded the opportunity to get into personnel, GM, analytics, or ownership exposed to them? Or are they exposed to, Bill hired 1 million lacrosse coaches. And lacrosse players. Find a more privileged game.
Yeah.
So to me, that is, in essence, too, what you have to look at. People are going to hire people who are recommended to them. And if the circle of people, I found you and listened to you and Brian and said, oh, I want to use them. I want to learn from them. I want to introduce people to these guys because I like them. But I could have stayed in whatever small circle I was in and brought people in that I only knew. Mm-hmm. Just keep going with Reese and Phil and, Bert. But, who's that help? Anyway.
No, it's a fair point. And that's where it kind of gets tricky because at one point, if you have someone like a Shanahan who's grown up and watched the game from such a young age and has a completely different perspective, you can't act like that person isn't still worthy of some type of opportunity because obviously they have just so much built-in knowledge. Is it fair? Maybe not, but that's the reality. We're trying to win football games. This is a business. But at the same time, like you said, it's incumbent on ownership to actually create the opportunities where I love that you said actually who you're seeing and who you're interacting with. Because to say you hired a bunch of Black employees, but they really only get so far and they only speak to certain people, that's not really helpful because they need to also get the experience and have it be a mutually beneficial situation versus just doing it because you're checking a box. And then it's all right, well, now we're kind of stuck in the basement, but we never got an opportunity to see how the sausage was made, how we could advance ourselves elsewhere. And you never really gave us a fair shot. So starting the show off on a heavy message, but it is an interesting conversation, one that has to be addressed.
Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS and get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed.